when you lose a child, you feel like you've done something wrong. You feel like you've totally messed up. And then how can you be a father to your other kids if you've messed up with one kid? I'd failed as a dad, ultimately. I hadn't kept my daughter alive.
Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then please hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. It really does help make sure that these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. Today, I'm joined by three remarkable men who are, in my view, the epitome of finding hope through crisis and despair. Airey, Mike Palmer and Tim Owen, better known as Three Dads Walking, would all rather have never met. But they did, and through a common and tragic bond, the loss of their daughters Sophie, Beth and Emily to suicide. Racked by grief, these three dads connected and decided that together they would shine a light on the shocking number of young people who take their own lives in the UK. Suicide is the biggest killer of under 35s. A 300-mile walk between their homes in Cumbria, Manchester and Norfolk in 2021 was their first epic venture. A 600-mile walk followed the next year, and another is planned very soon. Along the way of that first walk, the three dads have raised over £1 million for the brilliant suicide prevention charity PAPYRUS. A new book, Three Dads Walking, 300 Miles of Hope, tells the story of their loss and the courage they've found on those walks, often accompanied by others who lost children to suicide also. It's a powerful, important read. So today, this is a conversation about the crisis of suicide, about grief, about recovery, and of creating something positive from the darkest of places. Andy, Mike and Tim, welcome to Crisis What Crisis. How are you, gents?
Yeah, good. Good to see you.
Thank you for being here. The book is something else. Very moving, quite a tough read in places, but ultimately incredibly uplifting. I suspect quite a tough project for all of you.
Well, we didn't set out to do it, the book. Well, it was just a byproduct, wasn't
Just a
it?
journal, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It was, but it felt right to do.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't it? Absolutely. You know, we had the journal, we had a story, and we knew we had to tell it.
Yeah.
You had journals of the walk, but you also draw on journals that were real time, really. Mike in particular,
Yep.
right in the sort of visceral first days.
Yeah. It
Must have been very difficult to pull that together.
It wasn't as if I'd written anything before, but the feelings and emotions and the grief and everything after losing Beth, for some reason I just needed to get it down. You know, I needed to try and process it, and putting it down, you know, sitting there in front of my laptop and writing it, you know, sometimes it just came naturally, and, you know, and I still don't know why I really wrote it now.
Because it reads as though you were writing it in real time in places.
I was writing it in real time.
You were, right.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely writing it in real time. Yes, day in, day out, I was recording it. I mean, there's even more to it than there's actually in the book, to be quite honest. But I needed to, it was just a need to put it down somehow, to record it.
Yes.
I felt as though it's important, and I was encouraged by some friends to do that as well.
Yeah, but also the sort of healing nature of writing, the kind of getting it out. Did you all feel that as well in this process? Has it helped in that sense?
After, I was talking to Mike at the time, you know,
Yeah.
4 weeks after losing Em, 3 weeks after losing Beth, we were talking, and Mike was talking about his journal, and I did a little bit, but nothing on the scale of Mike, and really
You appeared in it quite a lot.
I know I did. Yeah. We did, actually. But I didn't. The first time really we started writing was when we started the journal into the book, which
Exactly.
we kind of expanded, and you led the way on that, didn't you, Andy?
Yeah, well, it was. I've got to say, the bit that Mike wrote, I've read the whole lot that he wrote down, and it's like living in his head, and at the time, that was a particular horrible place, wasn't it?
An awful place.
It's an amazing piece of writing, because it was just that diary of grief.
You do go through, you know, the process of grief, no matter how you look at it. You know, you have the anger, you have the guilt, you know, and basically I was suicidal myself. I'd lost my little girl, and I was lost myself. I was shattered into, you know, what I suppose stereotypical firefighter I was. You know, I dealt with incidents of life and death many times, never took it lightly, but I always felt as though I processed it, you know, very well. But to lose my daughter on that level, and, you know, losing her to suicide as well, it just absolutely shattered me. And you can't even, I couldn't even reach out to my family and friends. Everyone was so distant. You know, the whole world changes colour. You know, the whole world was literally black and white. Things were familiar, but nothing was the same. You know, it's an awful, awful place.
I think that Mike and I got together, and I knew I needed peer support from other stuff I've been through. And like Mike was talking about, the firefighter and doing nasty stuff at work, but then you've got peers to support you because you're in it together. When you lose your child to suicide, you feel isolated, alone. And like Mike said, turning to your friends and family, you're burdening them, but talking to someone, another dad, in a pretty similar situation, no one's quite the same. It was a massive privilege and massive support for each other. And then when we met Andy a few months later, well, a year later or so, just to know Andy was like 14 months ahead of us in his grief journey. And look, how do I get from where I am now to where Andy is? And where then we met other people who were 7 years down the line and stuff. Always looking, it's that kind of need that support from peers, but then also, how do I get further down the line? How do I
lose that fact, don't you? When you're a father, you're there to protect. And I do believe that. I thought I'd done a pretty good job on Beth, you know, but all of a sudden that was taken away. I've got 2 other girls. You know, all of a sudden I didn't feel capable of doing any of the fathering and protecting anymore. You know, so it's so important to start talking to Tim at first, and then Andy. You know, it's that peer thing.
And the ability to see that grief, which we've talked a fair bit about on this podcast with other guests, is that grief doesn't go, it just changes. And the sort of size and shape and the challenge of it changes as time goes by. So you were able to kind of understand that, because, as you say, Andy was 14 months ahead of you.
But the thing is, what we've learned is everybody deals with grief differently. There isn't a right way, or there's definitely quite a lot of wrong ways. I think we've found. But for me, that process started in terms of actually trying to manage the grief on the afternoon that we found out that Soph had died. Just before Christmas 2018, she'd sent out a message indicating she was going to take her own life, and she went missing for 3 days. And it was on the 3rd day that her body was found. And it was, that was awful.
That period.
It's torture.
You travelled up to...
We went up... She was living
in Edinburgh, is that
That's right, yeah. So we went up from Cumbria up to Edinburgh for 3 days, but it became clear that we were just... Well, we're getting in the way of people who were doing the searching. And also it was doing us no favours at all. So we'd gone home. So we were back at home on the Saturday, the 22nd is when they found Soph's body. And you're just broken in pieces, aren't you? Just shattered's not the right word. You're just beyond broke. And that feeling of not understanding how you're going to carry on living through the next 5 minutes. You know, it's painful, really seriously painful.
Physical pain, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this kind of visceral gut feeling that you wouldn't want to wish upon anybody. But with us, that afternoon, as we were in the mess of crying and snot and tears and some laughter still, actually, remembering Sophie, our local vicar came round, and he came round to our house thinking he was walking into a house where we were looking for a missing person. But he walked into us to find that we'd just discovered that Sophie had died. And Stuart sat with us for quite a long time. We had lots of cups of tea in a very English manner, I suppose. And Stuart talked about love and grief and loss. One of the things he said that afternoon resonated with me then, and it proved to be true. Stuart said that a lot of people will say to you that time's a great healer. He said, that's a load of rubbish. So you'll always carry this Sophie-shaped hole around with you. It'll never go away. You've got that. And at the moment, it's the biggest thing. It dominates everything that you can see. So you're just going to dive into that hole of grief. But he said over time, you'll find something or some things that will begin to protect you from that gaping void. Obviously, we didn't know what, but I remember thinking at the time it was that kind of glimmer of hope. Hope is a word we keep using a lot, but for me, in that way of processing grief, it was that first glimmer of hope that somehow there'll be a way that our lives could carry on. At the time, that afternoon, you had no idea how to get through an hour, how to breathe. Yeah. You just didn't understand, but that just little seed of hope was phenomenally important for me, and it's certainly something I've passed on to other people as we went along.
Yes. Tell me, if you don't mind, Andy, tell me a bit about Sophie.
Soph was fantastic. She was great fun. She was actually 29 when she died, working as a nurse up in Edinburgh. But she was kind of loud and brash and funny. The door would always burst open and she'd come and go, "Hiya, hiya," and then shout at us and just invariably take the mickey out of whatever I was doing. But she was loving and caring and kind. And I just love it.
And it helped clearly as a nurse.
Yeah,
tremendous amount of people during the course of her working.
And the feedback we'd had from her colleagues was she was a fantastic nurse. You know, she was very caring and empathetic and could offer tough love, give you tough love if required. Very much like my mother, actually, who was also a nurse. So she didn't mess about, but just a great pleasure to be with. And my background in terms of work was in the outdoor trade, so I spent a lot of time out on the Lake District fells and mountains across the world. So spent a lot of time outdoors with me, walking and running and cycling and skiing. And so we just had a really great relationship, and she was just, really good fun to be with. She was, that year, 2018, she was going through a bit of a messy patch in her life. She'd split up with her husband through her own choice. It was her that had made the break. So she was going through something that was a bit challenging. And we were worried about her, but we weren't worried about her being suicidal. We were worried about her being happy.
Yes.
Because that's all you want as a parent, isn't it?
Yes.
And so we just didn't see this coming. She was due to come home to Cumbria on the 20th of December, and then we just got this message in the family WhatsApp group that said, "I love you all so much," which didn't quite ring true. And then before we could react to it, George, Soph's mum, my ex-wife, called to say that she got this message to say that Soph was planning to take her own life. Signed off with, "Please don't bury me." And that was when our world changed instantly.
Over those 3 days of not knowing. Yeah. You write in the book, Andy, about the sort of initial decision that you made, which I suppose is completely understandable, this kind of closing in of your life. But then you write about how you make this kind of conscious decision quite early on to get out into the village, right, and to sort of confront it.
Yep.
That is incredibly brave thing to do. But what is it that just tell me about your thought process as to why your view was I need to open this up rather than close this down.
It was the natural thing to do for us to do, and it wasn't just me. You know, we were sat at home, me, Fiona, my wife, and Gregor, our son. We were sat at home talking about what had gone on, and we did start to talk about what happened next, what happens next. And we made a few decisions that afternoon between the three of us. One was we weren't going to cancel Christmas. Obviously, it was 22nd of December. It would have been very easy to take everything down.
Yes.
But it was thought, no, we've got to do it. We've got to get through this somehow. We talked about it being, this is Sophie's choice and Sophie's decision. We couldn't allow that to, the what ifs, why didn't we see it coming? We couldn't allow that to crush us. But we also knew we had to tell people because we have so many friends and family. You can't hide that piece of news, whether you like it or not. Soph's died and died by her own hand. So we've got to tell somebody sometime. And it was like, well, we need to get out of the house as well. Let's go out and get some fresh air. And we knew in that process of being out of the house and walking around the village, we would bump into people. And we would just tell them. It felt like the right thing to do. And it wasn't brave, it was just the way we are. What it's set in I suppose a chain of events that reinforced the idea that talking about what happened to us and what happened to Sophie helps other people. We didn't realise that at the time, but it was so obvious that by talking and being open, it encouraged other people to be open and talk.
It just started, from your perspective, to remove the stigma, remove the sort of silence that is so often. We'll talk about this in more detail.
Yeah, but not
wrapped around.
It wasn't a plan. It was absolutely.
Yeah, this
felt the right thing to do.
It was instinctive. Yeah. Tim, could I ask the same question? Tell us a bit, please.
Yeah.
About Emily.
She was beautiful. She was vivacious. She was crazy. She was life and soul of the party. It sounds a bit very Sophie-like, but there was another side to Em that we hadn't seen, or a lot of people outside the family didn't see. Since she was young, she was one of 4 children, and she was always a bit different to our other children, kind of outburst, temper, emotional irregularity, and she hit puberty, and she really started to struggle with her emotions, and it came to kind of a crisis point, if you like, in between the age of 13 and 15, when we had every man and his dog involved in our family, which was quite weird because I'm a professional guy and getting all this support from social services and CAMS and everything. And did have some suicide attempts in that period. The key thing is we were given we didn't know there was such a thing as a suicide prevention charity, even though we're under the care of all these professionals. So between the age of 13 and 15, our life was very, very dark, and her life was dark. And then she had, one of our friends said, have you considered autism, high-functioning autism? Went through the process. Anyhow, we had a private assessment and got her assessed, and she was high-functioning autism. And suddenly, everything started to fall into place. And we understood what triggered Em's behaviour by putting demands on her. She understood what could trigger it, and we just changed our lifestyle. And if we'd had that diagnosis, say 10 years earlier, it might have been a very different story, but we didn't.
So alongside, as I understand it, alongside the difficulties, Emily's also talented, very talented kid, right?
Yeah.
Talented artist.
Whatever she did, she was talented at, which is a lot of what we subsequently find out. Lots of autistic people are.
Exactly. Yeah,
massively. She did athletics, played for the county. She rode. She fantastic artist. She did all this stuff. But she did it so well. She always put pressure on herself and then stepped back from it. But she, with the help of everyone at school, with lots of support, she got some GCSEs, went to art college, did some fantastic art, then did a year of becoming a personal trainer, did a bit of that. So she was cramming a lot into her little life.
Passed a driving test, got a car, which was
so important. Because we live rurally, she was quite confined. Passed your driving test, and she suddenly had the freedom that she needed. So she never ever felt confined. She could go out. So her way of coping with her autism was working at the pub, community pub in the village, fantastic community pub where she was the life and soul of the party, going to the gym and driving a car around the roads of West Norfolk. And it was the week before lockdown, and it was when, if you got some symptoms of COVID, you had to isolate as a family. And we started to cough in the family, and it's like, right, we've got to go into lockdown. We phoned Em. She was at the gym, funnily enough. And we knew that it had been preying on her mind, this impending lockdown, because she'd been talking about, I might not be able to go to the gym, the pub might close, or the pub will close, etc. So she was really concerned. And I told her that it doesn't matter, Em, you're living at home. I'm not going to lose my job. It'll be fine. We'll be fine as a family. Anyhow, on the Monday, we told her she's going into lockdown. She had a bit of an explosion on the end of the phone, but then she picked the phone straight back up and said, right, what do you want me to do? She went shopping for us in Tesco's, got a massive shop. Somebody criticised her in the shop. It was really interesting. She was going around the shop and she got really upset about this. 19-year-old kid to feed 6 people, so £120 the bill came to. And an old couple told her off at the checkout for hoarding food and never gave her a chance to explain. And she came back home and she was really, really gutted about that. But we went into lockdown as a family. On the Monday and Tuesday, everything was fine. But on the Wednesday, she woke up and she was stressed. She wanted to go out. She wanted to take the dog for a walk on the beach, as she did 20, 25 minutes away. We said, you can't, Em, because the rules are, she by now was coughing and you can't. And she slammed the door and went out into our garden. Our garden's quite big, or was quite big. We've moved since then. And we just thought nothing more of it. And we found her about 10 minutes later, where she tried to take her own life. That was just, as Andy's already said, your world just implodes. You're dealing with all the emergency services coming to your house. You're dealing with your daughter, your other kids. It's just, there's no words for it. And she went into intensive care, but it was the COVID side of intensive care, so we couldn't see her for a couple of days. Then
so no contact.
No contact for 2 days.
Another layer of
just horrendous.
Yeah.
And the poor old hospital staff, because it was the week before Prime Minister announced lockdown, didn't know how to deal with her. You know, it was just a nightmare because they were all going through the first procedures. And then we had a phone call on the Friday to say it wasn't looking good. This is 2 days after she's attempted to take her life.
You're all having to deal with this together at home?
At home, with no support from family or anything, no physical support. And then we end up going to see her on the Friday night where she's got a common cold. She hasn't got COVID, she's got a common cold, so she's taken out of the COVID intensive care, put into normal intensive care. We went to see the doctors, nurses, who are awesome, absolutely fantastic, and they basically said there's no hope. She'll recover from this. The injuries to her brain are too bad. And you talk about hope. Andy was just talking about hope, and our hope, or my hope, if you like, started then because they said she signed up to be an organ donor when she was 12. Are you happy to do the organ donation? It was like, yeah, too right. And in that, the next 2 days, everything was being lined up to do the organ donation. And that was incredibly tough because lots of the staff that were assigned to do organ donation were now put onto COVID wards. So getting that whole chain of events together was horrendous.
So in the midst of all this, it's a sort of, not bureaucratic, it's the wrong word, but there is this process that you're trying to manage as well about the most horrendous
and going through that organ donation process, it's literally, you know, we found someone for a lungs, or we haven't, or we found someone for a kidney or whatever. So it's every single organ that you go through. And it sounds really weird, but every single organ that they found was a glimmer of hope. Andy spoke about hope. It's like someone else is going to come out of this better than us. Someone will be having a really good news story today when we're having the darkest news story.
You were able to sort of see it in those terms, we were doing, in the midst of it.
Yeah, it was just that because it was this black hole, and there was this one pinprick of light at that time, and that one pinprick of light was organ donation. If we can get something out of it, then other people might benefit from it. And we held her as she died on the Sunday. They turned the life support off, and then as soon as they turned the life support off, woof, she's out of there because they need to harvest the organs as soon as she's passed away, so you have no time left with her. And then we were just thrown into that black hole that Andy spoke about.
Oh, Tim, well, I'm so sorry, and I should have said this to all three of you right at the start. I am just so sorry for what you've all been through.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that anyone listening to this now is gonna feel exactly the same way. One of the things, Tim, that you say in the book is that in that period after losing Emily, that you found it impossible not to question everything that you'd done as a father, the words that you used. I'm sure this is something, you're all nodding, this is something that resonates across the three of you.
Absolutely, you're there to bring your kids, you do everything you can to protect your kids. You know, you try and provide them with a good house, just absolutely everything to give them that stable upbringing and everything that for their needs, and you want to give them the skills that they can survive on their own when they're older. And so when you lose a child, you don't know, you feel like you've done something wrong. You feel like you've totally messed up. And then how can you be a father to your other kids if you've messed up with one kid? And there's so much questioning internally for me over that period. Everything, I'd ever done was wrong. I'd failed as a dad, ultimately. I hadn't kept my daughter alive. And that was really hard to come to terms with. But there was a brilliant suicide bereavement worker called Steve from Mind, Norfolk and Waveney Mind, who came around to our house. And he was one of only 3 people that were allowed to come around to our house because of the COVID. We had to sit outside, 2 meters distance. And he started to talk about grief. He's ex-police officer and suicide. And then he told me to go on a course, which was called the Anchor Project. And this was about 6 months after Em died. And that was an incredibly powerful course. And Andy's already spoken about some of the emotions you go through after losing someone to suicide. It's grief with the volume turned up, because there's lots of guilt and blame around there. And it's guilt and blame, guilt at yourself, blame at the other person, blame at yourself, blame at family. There's some really toxic... Anger's another one. Yeah. Loads of emotions. And the most important thing that this course did was validate those emotions, said you are allowed to feel all those emotions. The key thing, though, is not to get stuck in any of those emotions. If you get stuck in any of those emotions, it will be destructive. So let yourself be angry at Em. Let yourself blame yourself. but don't blame yourself forever. Don't be angry at Em forever. Don't be angry at yourself forever. But you're allowed to have those emotions. It's what being human is all about.
Is it a case that the emotion, when those emotions come, or over time, those moments become less frequent and perhaps not quite as long or as deep as a deeper hole that they were right at the beginning?
Yeah.
One assumes, though, that all three of you still have those moments, right? They still
you keep falling in.
But you recognise it, and you're able to recognise it better than you ever did before.
I see it as sometimes having the ability to forgive yourself. That's the way I look at it now. I forgive myself for falling into these black holes on occasion, and sometimes they last for hours, sometimes they last for a few days, but I forgive myself and try and reinvent myself. But it's like my anger towards Beth. I understand my anger towards Beth, and if she could look down on me now, she'd understand as well, because I'm angry because I loved her so much. So it's things like that. Your mindset sort of changes. The grief's still there, but you're right. You have different ways of coping and different ways of looking at things.
And sometimes there'll be time. We've just had the 4th anniversary of Em's death on Friday, and we knew as a family that was going to be tough, and we've been building up, and almost the build up to it is worse, because at some point, especially because it was kind of a protracted 5-day death, basically, at some point over that time, you're going to feel emotions all over. You don't know what you're going to feel, but they're going to be, some of those emotions are going to come out, and you kind of prepare yourself for them. But then there's other times where we'll be giving a talk and Tim will start to cry as normal. Oh, he's going again. But there'll be, Em's got a fantastic painting, a self-portrait she did for GCSEs, and I'll put that up. Yeah. And I'll catch her eye on there, and that will just trigger me. So now, when I'm talking, I try not to look in her eye, because it just triggers me. But there's all these kind of triggers that I know will cause me.
And sometimes I assume it just comes out of nowhere.
Oh, yes, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Tim, can I ask you mentioned the incredible kind of legacy of the organ donation, but there was another remarkable moment that you talk about in the book that I think it also has a legacy attached to it. Some weeks after Emily's funeral, you're clearing out her room. You have to do it earlier than you wanted because you've got people coming to stay, and you find a note that she'd left behind that the police hadn't found. Can you just tell us about it, please?
So it was just hanging in a bag on her wall, and a piece of A4 paper folded into 4 and with "I'm sorry" on the front, and I opened it up. I knew as soon as I found it what it was. I was like, oh no, because the police had looked in her room, but there were no suspicious circumstances, so they hadn't looked. And I read that note, and Mike and I by this time were talking to each other. We'd met, and it felt like that moment again when I'd lost Em. And it just blew me apart. I just fell into that hole that you'd just spoken about. And there were 2 sentences in there. It was a really eloquent, and I won't go into the full detail of it because that's for us, but there was a really eloquent couple of sentences in there. It was, don't be ashamed. Well, like Andy, we hadn't been ashamed when all the world's emergency services had come to our house. We'd told villagers exactly what had happened. So don't be ashamed. And then the second really powerful sentence was, if other people can learn from what I've done. And I can remember telling Mike, I'd found it through more tears about what, and it was just that was almost like the green light from Em to do something. I didn't know what, but she wanted me to do something, to stop other people falling into this.
It's utterly heartbreaking. But, her being able to put that into writing, right, and recognising that there's something here that you, her parents, can go and use in some way. It's an astonishing thing.
It was just the note kind of just explained about her struggles, how she'd always struggled, her autism and stuff, and basically everything just being too much, I think, at the start of lockdown. And it was really emotional, but having that green light was really, really important for me. And it definitely just gave me Tim, you've got to do something. We didn't know what, did we, when I told you about it?
No, but then we had that, I think we both knew we had to do something.
Which didn't know what.
Yeah. Well, Mike, please, tell us a bit about Beth.
Bethy was the youngest of 3. Bethy was just 17. Bethy was training to be a vocal artist, She was at college in Manchester. She was absolutely smashing it. She was singing in local venues. She's also a very natural dancer. She was head of a show team, dancing team. She was very funny, very sharp-witted, and like Emily and Sophie, she was life and soul of the party. She had so many friends, many different circles of friends. Growing up, she'd been the most loving, happy little girl, always, on my shoulders until she got too big. Always holding my hand, always, daddy this, daddy that. And she could get away with anything by just saying, love you, Dad. She was cheeky, but she was the favourite cousin. She was she was a granddaughter, niece. She was so many things to so many people.
And as a performer, whenever she walked in the room, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But where she got her voice from, I'll never know, because I can't sing a note. Her mum's a dancer. She got that off her mum, but she belonged on stage, but was this an outward face she put on? I don't know. But, it's very difficult, isn't it? But certainly lockdown was a huge factor in her taking her own life. I remember very well the week before. We're nearly up to 4 years anniversary. It'll be her 4 years anniversary of losing Beth on the 28th. But looking back, I can see maybe signs that she wasn't at her best. She wasn't happy. She was asking questions. Dad, how long's this going to last? She was staying in bed. I was saying, Beth, come on, get out of bed, come downstairs, don't be ridiculous, come in the garden. I spent a lot of time doing the garden up, so it was nice. I wasn't really feeling the pressure of lockdown, but looking back, Beth was, and I probably missed signs as well. But Bethy, basically, she had the whole world at her feet. Maybe she made a very teenage decision. Maybe I'll never know.
Yeah.
But we were always there as a family, and it's very hard to fathom. But I find it very hard to look back at that happy little girl who had so many hopes, ambitions. She really had it all, but absolutely, she was absolutely loved. And, she showed that love back as well. But this is what we're trying to do, isn't it? Raise awareness to it. We never saw this coming. You see, Emily's story, Sophie's story, and Beth's story, they're all very different. But the commonality is they were all absolutely loved.
Yes. So, Mike, you had the, as you did Tim, the sort of nightmare scenario of your child dying at home.
Yeah.
I mean, you write about it, you touched on it already, so viscerally and powerfully in the book. Just give us just tell us what happened, if you can.
You're surrounded by uniforms, things going on that are out of your control, people asking questions, and you can see the despair on the emergency services face as well. This is the thing, it touches everyone. I've got my family around it, seeing the pain within your family too. People are coming, friends are coming, no one knows what's going on really there. It's absolute chaos, but as Andy said, you almost forget how to breathe.
Yeah.
It's the lowest place that you could ever imagine. As I say, you're literally shattered and you literally go almost underground. Everything is heavy, and I still remember it very vividly now.
You said that you were having suicidal thoughts, right? You were very clear about it in the book. How quickly? I mean, and I suppose
immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. I remember having a choice whether basically to hug my family or just carry on down the stairs and take my own life. It hits you that hard, and I think it's important that people hear that, because this is the ripple effect afterwards.
There is a statistic that I've seen. It's a fairly wide window. But even if we take the number at the lowest end of this, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So I think I'm right in saying it is something like a 35 to 300% chance that if you are related to someone who takes their own life, you are therefore likely to take your own. So even if we take it at the lowest number.
Yeah, I've taken it 80 to 300.
Right, okay.
They say suicide can affect up to 135 people. I know with Beth, it was far more than that. And you've got the family and friends, close family and friends, in the epicentre of it.
Yes.
And you plunge into an awful, awful place. It's almost understanding how someone becomes suicidal because, you just want to be gone. And I say it's important to talk about it. I'm still here now, 4 years later, and it's been tough at times, but now I have reason and I have a point. Everything's a little more focused. I've got my family to look after. Their lives would be so much worse if I wasn't here. And what we do with the three dads, we are passionate about this. We believe, we can make a difference to so many people because there are families out there now who sadly are not prepared for what is maybe just be round the corner. Mm.
So let's talk a little bit more about the statistics before I want to talk about the walk and how that came to be. We've mentioned it already. And the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK, 200 school-age kids every year. Yeah. And of course, these numbers may well be significantly higher. Tim, I think you alighted on this, quickly, right? Because of the way that our coroner courts work.
I said about the course that I went on with the suicide bereavement course in mind, and I'm a bit of a numbers man, and Louise, the facilitator, gave me the statistics for 2017, and that was where 6,000-ish people died by suicide. And then it was just before Em's inquest when Steve, the suicide bereavement worker, was chatting me through the inquest about what was going to happen. At that point, he said, you realise that Em might not die by suicide. Hey, we know she took her own life. And then he started to explain that, there has to be reasonable proof that she intended to do that. Unfortunately, we got the letter, so that was the reasonable proof. But we found, and Beth got a narrative verdict, didn't she?
Verdict,
and so that was the inquest for 4 days apart. Em's was on the Friday and Beth's was on the Monday, so we were talking to each other through that. And it was definitely the second walk, it really hit me. We met so many parents of 11, 12 and 13-year-olds en route. Not one of them I can remember the coroner saying it was suicide.
Really?
They were all death by misadventure.
Right. Most of the people that because it's a very moving aspect of your book, is these people who are joining you.
It was the second walk was where all those numbers really hit home to me. Right. And on the first walk, there were lots of people that were talking about, but I guess it was just the numbers. It was just like, hang on a minute, if there's 6,000... If we take 6,000 as a figure and there's 135 people affected by each suicide in the UK, that's over 800,000 people every year in the UK are affected by someone's suicide. If we go and take the death by misadventure, the open verdicts, the narrative verdicts, it's way more than 1 million people. It's got to be. And that figure of 200 school-age children, well, all of those 11, 12, 13 and 14-year-old kids that we heard about, they're not included in that 200.
Yes.
So there are so many kids out there.
Yes.
This is an epidemic, and we're not doing enough about it. Hence, we've got so enthused by our campaign to get suicide.
I want to talk about
I
want to talk about that. We're sat in a studio in Westminster. Maybe if we speak a little bit louder, we can try and get them there. But I'm really interested to hear about what you've done and what you plan to do on that front. But Andy, let's go back to the start of the first walk. So here you are, the three of you. This horrible, wretched thing that you all have in common. Just tell me how the walk comes about. Tell me how that kind of manifested between the three of you.
Well, to start off with, obviously we didn't know each other at all, and we'd lost Soph 14 months before Beth and Emily died, and the way that process started was Soph, at the time of her death, had been training to run a half marathon in the February, and over the Christmas we talked about what we were going to do, and Sophie's mate Laura, who she was training with, was still going to run this half marathon in Northumbria. It's finishing at Bamburgh Castle, and we talked about going across to support her. And then I kind of quickly realised that was copping out, and I really should be running the half marathon myself. And so I went to enter, and it was full. So I actually phoned the organisers, and they allowed me to run or enter on Sophie's entry, to run Sophie's entry. And as soon as I put the phone down, I thought, that's a fantastic human interest story. I'm sure I can use this to raise some money for PAPYRUS, who had been introduced to by a friend when we were looking for a charity to support Sophie's funeral. And so that's what I did. I started this thing, Run for Sophie. If you Google hashtag Run for Sophie, you'll find lots of videos of me being very sweaty doing a video diary. What are you laughing at? No, it's not good. None of them are good. And that started me down this fundraising path. And the money started rolling in very quickly. I think I was looking to raise £1,000, and quickly it was 10,000. I think in the end I raised about 40 on that run. But I realised by the time I got into the second week that the money was the byproduct, and what I was really doing was getting people to talk about suicide and suicide prevention, and introducing people to PAPYRUS prevention of young suicide and the work that they did. So that was me, and once the run was done, I just kept going because they're great people. They're just fantastic people, aren't they? And the work they're doing is just wonderful. And I couldn't stop, so I ended up doing another run. In lockdown, I was skipping and hula hooping incredibly badly.
Not imagine that now, can we?
No, don't even think about it. And so I became quite high profile within PAPYRUS. So that was me. Yeah, and then you two got together differently.
So it was Annie, my eldest, very sensible, very, very sensible. About 4 weeks after Em died, she came to me, middle of lockdown. Dad, I've met a guy in Manchester. I'm talking to him. I was like, she's 21. Not the time.
Your first thought was not a positive one.
No, it wasn't positive. If I'd known it was him, it wouldn't have been positive. Yeah. No. And it was like, Annie, what are you doing? And she got a long-term boyfriend who she's now married to, so it was always misstable. So what are you doing? No, Dad, it's not like that. They've lost a daughter. They've lost a daughter called Beth. And what had happened is Annabelle had reached out to another Emily, your daughter. And Emily had this strange girl called Annie contact her from Norfolk, and then Annabelle had ended up talking to Mike, and I texted you, didn't it? It was literally a month after Emma died.
And there was a long conversation I had with Annie, but basically it came down to, would you like to talk to me, Dad? And that was it.
But this is an aspect of your story where your other children play such a fundamental part.
I blame Annabelle for so much,
But it's interesting to me that your other kids were clearly aware of what you needed. And what you all needed as families, but what their dads needed.
Yeah, it was very bizarre. And then we spoke, didn't we, for ages? You found out about PAPYRUS, and then...
That's right. I started doing courses and some fundraising myself for PAPYRUS. Did something called Run the Ring, that's a VW thing around the M25, and stumbled on that by mistake. I was introduced to PAPYRUS by a friend of ours, basically. But I was on one of those courses. I started to hear about Andy. He's a bit of a legend within PAPYRUS. But I bumped into Andy's son on one of the champions courses there, and spoke to Gregor and said, I'd already started to hatch a sort of, I've spoken to Tim, how can we illustrate that suicide's the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK? It's by maybe walking from one house to another, from Manchester to Norfolk. But then Andy came in, I spoke to Gregor and said, would your dad be interested? And he says, I don't know, ask him. So then, sort of made contact with Andy, and it just made sense, didn't it?
Can I ask you guys, how have you approached it with your other children? Because you've talked about the impact on you as fathers. How was that kind of...
With my family, in all honesty, I don't think I gave them any chance to do anything other than get behind me, because I was so wrapped up in that run initially, the Run for Sophie stuff. And I knew, I could see very quickly I was making a difference, so I just was absolutely blinkered and focused on it. And so I kind of dragged Fiona along behind me. Gregor at that time was in his first year at university, at Liverpool University. And so he went through Christmas that first Christmas at uni, when he was back at home, trying to organise his sister's funeral. And he really was desperate to get back to uni at the end of January. And he went back, and it was good for him to escape from all that grief. But my family have been massively supportive. Gregor gets it. I mean, he goes out and he talks to a lot of people about papyrus and suicide prevention. You know, like all of us, we wear these papyrus wristbands. And Gregor is a great advocate for the charity, and invariably he'll be out in a pub somewhere and he'll be handing these things out. Yeah, and he does it. So he goes out and works as an advocate. But in hindsight, I didn't give him any chance. It was just, this is the way I'm playing.
And with your other kids.
Yeah,
I know that your youngest daughter, I think, was.
Yeah, she was great when we came across the finish line. She was there ready. I mean, she went into the Alison and Adam's BBC thing.
Yeah, in the van.
It was a van, and they were showing Evie the thing. But I've got the youngest kids, and we try and keep them away from. They're supportive, but they went through 2 years of lockdown, out of school. So my youngest two, schooling has been messed up massively. My eldest, Annie, she's just off and running. She's kind of Miss Teacher. She's going strength to strength. But, you put in the book you put in the book, I think, didn't you, about when we're walking into Manchester?
Yeah.
Where one of her pupils takes his own life as we're walking into Manchester.
Oh, goodness me.
And, that was, bless her, poor old Annie, that really hit her then. That she's her first 4 or 5 months of teaching.
Really?
She just lost a 14-year-old pupil.
Goodness me.
And the only thing that she got to deal with the only skill set she got to deal with was the skill set that she just lost a sister 16 months earlier. So, they're supportive, but we're trying to keep them.
Yes.
Yeah, not.
And finding that balance.
Finding that balance, especially with Dad going away on more walks as well.
Yeah. It's hugely complicated, isn't it? One thing that still very much hurts me is the pain I can see within my family still. My girls cope with it in very different ways, and basically they don't want to be in any limelight, and I'm fine with that as long as they're happy, and I'm so proud of the way they're coping as well. That's what matters to me, so my girls really keep out of the limelight, and that's fine, so it's a complicated thing. It's obviously we're very driven, but they do need protection as well.
Yeah, and something that you're constantly adjusting and just kind of. Yeah. But you must all be hyper vigilant of it all as well. You must be.
Yeah.
Doing things sensitively around them.
Yeah. You keep an eye on them, but it's hard, isn't it? It's that father thing as well. It's constantly there. Yes. But your children are the most precious things you could ever have. And you just want them to be happy. That's all. And I know so many parents now they're struggling because the children aren't happy. And whether it's all the pressures of life and different things we've got now, but I think the difficult times at the moment. So it's hard to be a parent, basically.
Yeah, it's hard with the stats. It's hard to get a clear grip on whether or not the numbers are going up. If you look at that over a long term, actually it looks like they've gone down, but you don't know if that's a sort of reporting issue as much as it is this issue with the coroner's courts as well.
Yeah.
But there is a general sense, isn't there? I mean, we get it a lot on this podcast. There's a general sense that there is more anxiety, that there is more, is more kind of, inward. Looking issues that are developing for younger people, rather than that kind of broader view of of life. Why is that then? I mean, you guys must spend a lot of time probably chatting about this on the walk. I don't know, but what's your analysis of where we are right now?
There's a couple of things. I think social media is one thing. When we went to school, you went to school at 8:30 in the morning. If you got bullied at school, it stopped at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You got your weekends free, but now that's 24/7. I also think there's massive pressure on the kids to achieve academically, which I certainly didn't have. If you look at my academic record, kind of scrape through stuff. But I just think there's a massive pressure on the kids to achieve academically and go to university. What pops out at the other end of university might not be a very resilient kid. It might just be a very academically qualified young person, but not resilient. I was quite used to failing at school. I failed many of my exams, but retook them. But it just doesn't seem to happen at the moment. So it just feels as though there's so much pressure on our kids to achieve academically. We don't need to put them under that much pressure.
To achieve academically, but also to achieve in this kind of weird world that they're seeing every day on their phones, right?
Yes, yeah.
Did technology play a part, do you think, the three of you, or not?
No, not with Sophie was 29. She was not. It was not part of that story for Sophie.
I don't think so. I know it took us ages because the police obviously want to get Em's phone, so they got Em's phone. We couldn't unlock it, and it was like, how do we unlock it? But they unlocked it just in case there was anything bad on there, and they didn't find anything. I think it was just total despair at lockdown, not being able to go out. Was her little brain couldn't process it.
Yeah.
With Beth, she was certainly on her phone, and she spent a lot of time on her phone. So I can't say for sure, but what I will say for our young people now, and certainly even myself, you are influenced 24/7 by your phone. And if you're a young person, it can totally take over your life. You just spend 24 hours on it. When you go to your bedroom and whatever, you can basically search whatever you want to. Social media is constantly pecking you. And if you ask me, I think the mobile phone and the internet, social media are the huge factors in our young people's lives. Yeah. And they're not always equipped to deal with it either.
But just to pick up something there, Andy, about what's changed, one thing that definitely has changed is people's attitude towards mental health issues and actually being open about it. Like when we were growing up, mental health issues or depression didn't exist because nobody spoke about it. It was not a thing. It was not a topic. Whereas now our young people are encouraged to talk. One of the things that we were prompted to do off the back of the first walk was go and have a look at the RSHE curriculum to see what was on it. And I've got to say, I was taken aback by how broad it was, particularly about mental health issues, about mental health and well-being, the benefits of exercise. So, and in there, there's a lot of things about emotional content, and it encourages our young people to talk. It actually encourages young people to open up. It doesn't actually tell you what to do with it in a lot of times. And I think going like Annie on the receiving end as a young teacher, our teachers are not taught to deal with any mental health issues that come up within their classes. And
so it's kind of diverted.
But our young people are encouraged to talk about it. So there's suddenly all this outpouring of information, but we don't have a structure to deal with it. And the one thing that we did spot was in that RSHE curriculum, suicide and suicide prevention is not mentioned whatsoever.
Yes.
So any young person who is starting to have suicidal ideation very quickly outside the stuff that is being talked about in schools.
Yes.
Which seems just bloody stupid.
Can you talk about that? Before we do, what's your sort of collective view then on what appears to be the sort of resilience gap? So we had Anthony Selden, who's I don't know if you've ever come across him as a most magnificent headmaster of some fairly well-known schools, but he was also the sort of pioneer of what got described as sort of happiness lessons. They weren't happiness lessons at all. It was resilience lessons, and that's his firm belief is that somewhere in this we have got to start building resilience in our young people. How do we do that alongside what is, I totally agree, this now much more positive place we are around the conversation on mental health? How do we also build in the resilience bit? What's your view?
I think we obviously want suicide prevention as a compulsory part of the RSHE curriculum. If you like, that is a line in the sand. Yeah. We also need to work to underpin all this. We need to work on life skills, and there are so many of them. As Tim's alluded to before, we need a balance between academic qualifications now and those life skills that will give the resilience so young people will be resilient, hopefully happy, and to be able to use these qualifications. So life skills can be all sorts, can't they? How to look after your money, how to eat well, just well-being as a whole, all kinds of things. But I think the balance has to change now, and I think Department of Education needs to look at this as well. You know, sort of, I think the evidence is in the fact that we are hearing more and more problems within universities of kids who are going to universities with a ruckload of academic qualifications, but not those basic skills to thrive, look after themselves and keep themselves safe. And I do believe it has to happen in schools. Schools are there to equip our young people, you know, so they can...
Exactly right. You guys are keen to see this, the idea of suicide, the conversation around suicide to begin at a much younger age.
Yep.
Right? That's the kind of key ask, isn't it?
Suicide prevention.
Suicide prevention at a much earlier age. You'd like to see that start, am I right? You want to see that start at about 8? Or
Well, it depends on how you define it. The thing that really got us wound up after the first walk, we'd had so many suicide bereaved parents who'd said to us they didn't see that suicide coming. It was only after the young person took their own life that they found PAPYRUS. It was only then that they found that suicide is the biggest killer of our young people. And they all said, why didn't anybody tell us? Yeah. Why didn't anybody tell us? If this is the biggest risk to our young people, why aren't we talking about it? And it was that prompted us to look at the school curriculum and then write to the government. And the response we got from the government, so this was Christmas 21.
Christmas 21, yeah.
Didn't half wind us up, because it said, it was a couple of pages. The first page was list of how much money's been spent and the work that's been done, and it was like, you're missing the point, because our question was, if this is the biggest risk to our young people, why do we tell them about it? And in the second bit of the letter, it went on to say schools may talk to older pupils. So it showed that, firstly, it wasn't compulsory, and they were only talking to 17 and 18-year-olds about it. And we met so many parents who'd lost young children. And imagine how they felt if their child, you're not old enough to get a suicide prevention lesson at 12 or 13, and, never mind, you've killed yourself.
What's their argument? I always think when you're looking at a campaign, look at the other side, right, and try and understand where they're coming from, which I know you guys have done. But what's the argument against introducing this subject with younger people? Is the concern that you're putting an idea into a much younger mind?
Yeah, that's it.
That isn't able to kind of understand the...
Yeah.
So what's your view on that argument?
So many kids get given a mobile phone. As soon as you give your kid a mobile phone, they've got an access to the world. And if they are having dark thoughts, they can Google it, they can look at it on there, and that's the last place you want your kids to be learning about suicide. Yeah. Because you need to be teaching our kids in a safe space about suicide prevention. And you're saying how young kids can be taught. In my view, they definitely need to be taught before they're at puberty. And you can do suicide prevention really gently, age appropriately, as you say, from 8, a young age. You don't have to mention the S word. You can simply have it. I saw a mom, we gave a talk at Keswick Mountain Festival, and a mom with her 2 children went to the PAPYRUS stand and said, do you know what this is all about? No, sometimes people don't want to be here anymore. If you ever feel sad, you'll come and talk to me, won't you? That was suicide prevention to 6 and 8-year-olds. You don't. It's simple. It's giving kids. If we as adults don't mention the S word, the kids will look at it on their phone. I heard of another couple of 12-year-olds die. One of their friends had tried to take their own life, and the 12-year-olds were overheard by a school member of staff on the psychiatric side. School members of staff. They didn't want to tell an adult because they were trying to risk assess that themselves. These 2 12-year-olds were trying to risk assess how bad their other friend's suicide attempt was.
They didn't want to
tell the adult because no one spoke to them about it. Yeah. So we as adults have got to recognise there's a problem. If a terrorist came up and blew up a school of 200 children every year, the government would do something about it. When they die as individuals, no one does anything about it.
Yes.
That's all we're saying.
That's exactly.
Treat the risk.
But to go back to how young do you start, one of the things that we've discovered is the idea of building a foundation of help-seeking behaviour. Yeah. And you can start that at reception. So the idea there is to build the idea into our young people as they're growing up that whatever challenging circumstances they're in, the way to actually deal with it is to reach out for help rather than try and solve a problem yourself. So that you can start that at 3 and 4 year old.
Make that a habit almost.
Absolutely. So that help-seeking behaviour is key, because on that foundation, you can build all kinds of different structures, whether it be in the financial world or bullying, or when it comes down to suicide prevention. If that foundation of help-seeking behaviour is built in there, our young people will actually, as they grow up, naturally reach out and ask for help. And that is the key to people being saved from taking their own lives. By asking for help.
So, election year, we're sat in a studio in Westminster. What is it we want to see? Are you looking for the three main parties to have this? Some might argue, by the way, it's more than 3. But that we should. You want to see a unity across all parties on this. Yeah, you want to see it in every manifesto.
Cross department.
Right.
That this is bigger than just politics.
Yeah.
If it can be, that's what it is.
Yeah.
But if we need to do stuff in schools. I mean, we hear so often from teachers as well, who are spending their days dealing with the mental health issues of the children, behavioural issues, and they're not able to teach. And we know teachers are wonderful people. We know they're leaving in such numbers. I mean, I've heard the figure of 65% stay in a job over 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's so we need to look after the teachers as well. We realise this.
Critical.
So it has to be a whole school approach.
Yeah.
But in 1 or 2 phrases, what is it that you want to see in a manifesto?
Suicide prevention is a compulsory subject on the school curriculum. How's that one sentence?
That's it. He's a marketing man.
He's all over it. That was exactly what our petition was that got the 160,000 votes or signatures.
Yeah.
That was exactly what all the MPs were debating in Parliament. And they all, once they'd looked at the figures, they all quoted the Office of National Statistics figures at each other. Yeah. And then we've got to do something about this. We need to.
It's right.
Everyone
what
is agreeing.
those fellas said, yeah.
So you can still sign up to this now. Where are we going to direct people?
Well, the petition's
towards?
gone, but you can write to your MP. The best thing to do is to write to your MP, whichever party they're from.
Right, it's the MP. But we have taken, experts have gone on our request, roundtable meetings with the Department of Education, and they basically have said, we need to teach suicide prevention in schools. We need to, and we've seen it. There's many trials out at the moment. I must mention the Liverpool John Moores University have their MAPS trial now. That's fantastic. A multimodal approach to preventing suicide in schools. That is absolutely wonderful. If you've seen it being taught to, I've just seen it recently to year 10s. Absolutely amazing. The way the kids absorbed it, they don't have a problem with it. Absolutely wonderful.
Removed.
The feedback and everything we get them. We need to do it. So I've probably gone off track with the question.
But if someone wearing a rosette turns up on your door, dear listener, viewer, the question to ask first and foremost is, where are you on suicide prevention?
Yeah, that's it. This is the biggest risk to our young people in this country. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
very good. Very good. Well, let's see if we can get that going. It occurs to me, gents, that we haven't talked about the walk. In a way, I think that's rather good.
Yeah,
because
go and buy the
what
book.
we're going to tell people to do is go and buy the bloody book.
Part 2.
Exactly. But I can say, because I've read it, it is an astonishing read. It's the simplest of ideas in some ways, but in that idea of just getting out and walking together, you have, as evidenced by the people who came and joined you, the people who supported you, Daniel Craig, Nicole Kidman, Prince William, but then
Lou Macari, don't forget
Lou Macari, who
that's a Man City supporter,
who of course lost his own son.
He's a star,
to suicide.
Absolute star, that man.
The book is, we touched on this earlier, the word journey is massively overused these days, but yours is an entirely appropriate use of it. It's the most astonishing read. So I want to say thank you, Ashley. Thank you for coming in today. Thank you for writing this book. I think it's going to make the world of difference to people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's great to meet you all. If you've enjoyed this conversation with Andy, Mike and Tim, please do give us a rating and a review. It really does help enormously. And if you hit subscribe wherever you download your podcasts from, you will find loads more useful crisis conversations. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and you can watch the full episodes on YouTube. Just search for Crisis What Crisis podcast. You can also find full transcripts of this and every episode we've recorded on our website, crisiswhatcrisis.com. And if you or anyone you know has had suicidal thoughts, please do reach out to Papyrus, the charity that Andy, Tim and Mike have supported so brilliantly, on 0800 068 4141. Thank you for listening. Hello, I'm Andy Coulson and welcome back to Crisis What Crisis and another Crisis Comforts episode. Short but perfectly formed advice for getting you through the tough times. As regular listeners will know, at the end of our conversations, we ask all our guests for their 3 crisis comforts, their go-tos for inspiration and strength during the challenging times. And over the years, we've accumulated some incredibly interesting, much more importantly, useful tips for anyone who might be feeling the weight of their own problems. I've just had a conversation with 3 extraordinary men, Andy, Mike and Tim, brought together by the tragic loss of their daughters, who each took their own lives. The 3 dads walking, as they are better known, have taken their collective grief on the road up and down the country in order to raise awareness around the often taboo subject of young suicide. It was a difficult, but I think very important conversation, and I'm sure, like me, you'll be moved by the sheer courage of these, as I say, ordinary guys who've done something truly extraordinary. If you want to support them, you can do so. Just go to our notes for links, and do please listen to the full conversation if you can. But in the meantime, if you're short on time, you can listen now to their 3 crisis comforts in this quick taster. And remember, if you or anyone you know is having or have had suicidal thoughts, you can reach out to PAPYRUS, the charity that these guys support, on 0800 068 4141. Many thanks for listening. Before you go, I'd like to ask you all for your crisis comforts. So we can do this the long way or we can do this the short way. It is entirely up to you. But what we ask our guests to do is give us 3 things that they sort of lean on in those difficult moments. Can't be another person. You can't be another person, I'm afraid. Anything other than another person. But you can either have 1 each or you can have 3 each. I'm all for the long version, I have to tell you, but I've taken up a lot of your time today, so up to you.
Okay.
What are the things that you sort of lean towards?
The first one for me is definitely getting outside. Living in the area that I live in Cumbria, it's be outside. We live in the Eden Valley.
I'm sorry, Andy. I'm going to take the walk as a given. This book is called 3 Dads Walking.
I know.
I'm not letting you.
That's what I do. It's a fantastic thing to be able to do, just to get out in the outdoors, and the being out in the green, verdant countryside, which hopefully we'll soon get in the spring.
Yes.
is incredibly powerful.
You're about to embark on the next walk, right?
Yeah.
So from where? Is it 500 miles, I think?
17th of April.
Yeah. Stirling
I have
to
got the
Norwich.
right day, haven't I?
You have, mate, yeah.
Stirling to Norwich, kind of through a load of the new offices PAPYRUS has opened. When we first walked, they've got 5 offices or hubs. They've now got 18 or 19, so we're just trying to highlight.
Amazing. In large part due to your efforts. And the helpline, or the Hope Line, as it's rather brilliantly
Hope line
called,
247
is now 24/7.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas it used to just be daytime hours.
Yeah. So
Okay, so getting outdoors.
Yep.
It can be a
No,
particular book.
No, it's
It
not.
can be-
It is people. People are phenomenally important. I know that's against your rules.
You're going to have it as a generic rather than a specific person.
Yeah, no, it is. There's just the need to be able, that realisation that help is out there, and it is out there, whether it's with your friends or family. Somehow, if you are in a period of crisis, that you've got to be able to reach out. You've got to be able to reach out, whether it's to something professional or somebody you know. So there's 2.
Has work been a comfort for the 3 of you?
yes, it has. It's been a distraction. It's taken up time, which I had 5 months off after losing Em. But then after that...
You should explain that you're in the Air Force.
Yeah. So I had 5 months off. They were absolutely superb. They've been absolutely... My colleagues were superb. And then coming back to work and kind of the normality of work, if you like, has been brilliant. Has been brilliant. I wouldn't say it's a comfort in crisis.
No,
but it's a thing that I do.
Yeah. You were shaking your head.
I'm shaking my head because I was unable to go back to work properly. I did try. I was diagnosed with PTSD after Beth, and it was right. It was a correct diagnosis. Were incredibly supportive, but they didn't have a manual of how to deal with me in my grief. I was changed very much in character, my tolerances, aspects of the job as well. So,
and you're a fireman working at.
I was a firefighter. Yes. Yeah. So yes. So So no, it wasn't, but they were extremely supportive. So, yeah.
Let's get back to the comforts.
Okay.
We're going to do the... We'll just jump in, guys,
Okay.
rather than just jump in.
Okay.
So Cornwall for us.
Yeah.
Well, for me in particular, I love Cornwall. I always go down there in the summer holes and stuff. M's scattered down there, and we've got a little bench on the Roseland Peninsula down there for M on the National Trust headland, St Anthony's Head near there. And so Cornwall has been, it was such a positive part of Em's life. It was where she was happy. I've always been happy down there. So Cornwall. And if we're sticking with Cornwall and stuff, you know, fudge or something like that, some food. Am I allowed to say that? That's not that's my cholesterol diet, isn't it? That's that. But yeah, the whole Cornwall thing for me is a happy place. It's a good place. Really, really good memories.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm known as the Manchester Dad, but I have actually moved to Anglesey now, a beautiful place called Chemice Bay. And I've moved there basically because it's by the sea, you have the countryside, and it's stunningly beautiful. But being outside, walking, and I'll throw another comfort in now, my small dog, 12 years old.
Monty.
Yeah, a Jack Russell Poodle cross.
What a star.
Of slightly dodgy temperament.
Slightly dodgy
temperament. but those things are a great comfort.
Well, our animals
to me.
are very important.
That's it.
Yeah.
Hugely important. He's been, since losing Beth, he's been an absolute constant there.
You describe in the book how he's the one who actually is getting you up and get out in those early days.
I had to. He's got some terrible habits. He smells a bit dodgy sometimes.
Like his dad.
He'd always be that dog would be sliding along on his backside if we were filming. Yes, but he's a huge comfort. But I've got two in there, haven't I? Anglesey. Or actually, I could go open water swimming as well.
Oh my God.
Is another one that there's the wonderful Chemice Bay swimmers there. And I've ended up going out with them sometimes, even during the winter. But there is something about that. It does awake something within you.
Well, we haven't touched on it. Perhaps for another time. But you've also,
Part two is
your rowing. Your rowing history is epic.
Yeah.
Atlantic crossings, real drama.
Yes. Yeah.
There's another podcast in that, mate. Gents, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
for sharing your story, and thank you again for this book and everything that you do. And good luck with the next walk.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this conversation with Andy, Mike and Tim, please do give us a rating and a review. It really does help enormously. And if you hit subscribe wherever you download your podcasts from, you will find loads more useful crisis conversations. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and you can watch the full episodes on YouTube. Just search for Crisis What Crisis podcast. You can also find full transcripts of this and every episode we've recorded on our website, crisiswhatcrisis.com. And if you or anyone you know has had suicidal thoughts, please do reach out to PAPYRUS, the charity that Andy, Tim and Mike have supported so brilliantly, on 0800 068 4141. Thank you for listening.